next dish is going to be our soup, which is a curried butternut squash soup. And I'm going to have to readjust my camera to turn it around because I lost a little part of this video in the beginning of prepping the onion and the butternut squash. And I think these little tips that I might be able to give you could be a little bit helpful for this. But this recipe has been a staple of my Thanksgiving for probably about 30 years. And because it has curry in it, you might say to yourself, well, why is that Mediterranean? But again, you'll see that we're starting with the extra virgin olive oil. And then the curry is just, it does take it to the east, but it's not a heavily curried type of recipe. So I think you'll like it. I think it's one that I've made, as I said, for so many years, and I think it's really delicious. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to turn my whole little unit around here so you can see. Okay, and I won't be able to see you while I do this, but I hope somebody from the chat room, some technical person, tell me if you can see this well. Okay, I think I need to lower this down a little bit. There we go. Well, the first thing we do to start this soup, it's just like so many Greek recipes. It's going to start with olive oil and sliced onions. And the only thing I really wanted to show you is that the chefs at HRTM showed me how to cut an onion so that you don't really feel that burning in your eyes from it. And I know everybody has their method for this, but this one I think really works well. So I'm taking my onion and I'm identifying the stem side versus the root side. And apparently what you don't want to disrupt is the root side of the onion, okay? So that being said, I'll just cut off the top part, and I just have a little bowl here for my compost materials. And then I'm just going to run my knife down the edges of this onion, just like so, and just peel off the outside like this. And again, you can see that what I've cut so far hasn't done anything to the root. Okay. And then I'm just going to cut, I'm going to keep the root intact and cut from the outside. And, you know, in this particular recipe, it doesn't matter if you make little rings or if you make chunks, because this whole soup is going to end up going in the food processor at the end. So that's really good. And I'm going to go as close to the root as possible because, you know, I don't really like to waste ingredients, but I don't want to disrupt that root. Without disrupting that, it's great and I'm not crying. I don't know what your families might have discovered. I've heard of some people who cut their onions under running water, ice water, and that helps. And I know my own mom used to wear sunglasses sometimes when she did her onions. But that's all you really have to do is just rough cut these. And then I'm going to turn this around so that you can see my stove. And I've got a pot on the stove. This is a cast iron skillet. It's coated with enamel, which is really nice so things don't stick to it. And I'm just going to put my extra virgin olive oil in here. And it's really just about enough to cover the bottom. It's probably, you know, maybe not more than like a tablespoon or a tablespoon and a half, something like that. And then I'm going to start this up. And as I mentioned with the dates, you know, you don't want to ever cook with olive oil on really high heat because it does have a low smoke point. So I'm going to start that and just let that warm up a little bit. I'm going to bring my onions over. And, you know, when you're using any kind of enamel pan, you always want to use a wooden spoon or a silicone spatula or something of that nature so you don't scratch it. And then basically all I'm going to do is just saute these onions. I am definitely not going for a brown onion here. I'm just going for these to become translucent and real soft so that they can be pureed well. So while that's going, I'm going to show you about the butternut squash. So this is what the butternut squash looks like. Voila. This is about 3 pounds. And the thing about them is they're a little bit hard to cut. So I had Harris sharpen my knife. I showed this knife in the first Zoom call I did. This was from our presidential chef, Peter, who gave this to me when we were leaving. And I asked Harris to sharpen it for me today so that I could be sure I could get through this, because sometimes butternut squashes are very, very hard. First thing I'm doing is I'm taking off the two ends, and then I like to cut down the middle between the two parts, the thinner part and the fatter part. So here's the thinner and here's the fatter. And then I'm just going to use my trusty potato peeler or vegetable peeler to peel the skin off. Well, this is probably what I should have had him try to sharpen as my peeler. And you know what? If it doesn't work for you for whatever reason, you can always use your knife. But the thing about butternut squash is it's very slimy. So when you start getting in under the skin, it's very, it's slippery. So I think what you want to be careful of is not making sure that you don't pick up your knife when you have this kind of slimy butternut squash on here. And of course, one of the things that I talk about when I sent out your ingredients list, I said, well, you can also buy this from the supermarket that's already cut. But, I have a slight aversion to that because I just feel like somebody then has handled it. It's one thing when they handle it with the peel still on it, but when they've cut through, and you're just not too sure about everybody's hygiene. And these days we're so sensitive about that with COVID and everything. So, and I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can keep going. And you know what, if you want to, in the book, it tells you how to toast the seeds from this, because sometimes it's nice to drop the seeds on top. I'm just going to give my onions a little stir because I don't want them to brown. And I'm going to turn them down a little bit lower. There we go. But I think, you kind of get the idea here. It can be a little tricky, but you can do it. And if you do choose to do the seeds, you can add a nice spice to them if you want to. Maybe with a curried soup, it might be fun to do turmeric seeds. And we know that these spices like curry and turmeric are really great antioxidants. And there's where you can see where the seeds are in this part. So if I was going to work with those tonight, I would scoop them out and I would have to rinse them off and then dry them in the oven on a cookie sheet before I could really, bake them. It's kind of a two-step process, but that's written about in the book as well. So here we go. I'm getting through it all right. And again, you don't have to make these into tiny pieces. And the reason is because we're going to boil them up and then we're going to puree them. So I think this size piece is just about right. So let me just see. There I am. Hello, everybody. So right now, I think Chardonnay, since we've gotten the onions rolling here and we've gotten the butternut squash started to be peeled and cut up, you can start the curried butternut squash soup recipe from where the tape takes off. With all this butternut squash cut up, I'm going to put it into the stock pot. Oops, I don't want to put any peels in with it. So, don't let it get away from you. Oh, this is fun. Cooking is fun. Take it lightly. Have fun with it. It's a story. And I'm sticking with it. Okay. The next thing is that we're going to put 2 apples into this recipe. And I'm going to cut them and peel them. In this way, cutting the bottoms. I find like this is really easy. Looks like my shopper got an apple with a few little bruises on it, but that's okay. It will not show in the soup, so that's good. I'm afraid if I say anything, I might hear do it yourself. So there we go. And again, I don't want to get the core in here. I just want to get the nice pretty apple. They really smell good though. You know, that's the thing. We eat with our eyes first, and then we eat with our noses and our taste buds. There's a lot that goes into to appreciate in food. There's a lot of sensory stimulation and appreciation. And that's one of the things about the Mediterranean that I really enjoyed so much when I lived there, is that people really take their time with their meals and they enjoy it. And I think that they're sexually satisfied by the meal, so they're not out looking for something else to snack on an hour after dinner, you know. So that's nice. And you would never find anybody in the Mediterranean who's eating at their desk or standing over the sink and eating, or eating in their car. You know, it's not about eating. Is too important to be multitasked in the Mediterranean, which is kind of nice, because when you're satisfied by your meal, I think you're not really looking for anything else later, which is good. You don't tend to overeat. Okay, so we need some liquid in this stock pot, and we're going to use 2 liquids in the soup. One thing I called for was do-it-yourself vegetable stock, but I realized that not everybody has a garden, and at this time of year, even if you have a garden, you may not have enough vegetables in it to make a stock. So we can use vegetable stock that we buy. Now, I like to buy either organic or low salt or no salt. My shopper didn't buy that, but this has no artificial flavors, no synthetic colors, and no artificial preservatives. So that sounds pretty good to me. We're going to add this whole quart of vegetable stock right into this pan. And what we're going to do here is we just want to boil this up so that we can soften the squash enough to make it into a pureed soup. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to get this going. I'm pretty happy. I'm going to cover it up so that it boils faster. And we're going to keep on boiling this until it's fork tender, basically. Once it's fork tender, we can get the solids out and we can puree them. Okay, so that's what we'll do next. So now that our onions are sort of translucent and not too browned, I think you can kind of see that there, we can add in the curry powder. And of course, a little bit, you know, this is a little bit to your taste, but I have found that about 4 teaspoons works. You know what, I don't like how this teaspoon doesn't fit in my jar, so I'm going to use the ½ teaspoon. So we use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ½ teaspoons. So that's 4 teaspoons, okay? Not 8 teaspoons, but 4 teaspoons of curry powder. Hopefully your jar won't be as small as mine and you'll be able to stick your teaspoon in there. Okay, and then I'm just going to turn this around so that all these delicious onions get flavored by this curry. And what's nice here is you're going to have a little heat with the curry powder, and you're going to have a little sweet from the onions having been sauteed like this. So I'm just going to kind of let these for a few minutes until that curry powder sort of gets, is not so powdery anymore. everything is kind of looking a bit like this, it's good to leave it and just turn it off and let it sit until you're ready to put this into the rest of the ingredients to puree. Okay, so I'll turn that off and we'll just let that sit for a little bit. We are working on our soup, and who do you know shows up but the secret shopper, the person who went out and got us all these great ingredients for our dishes. He took off his mask so he can give you a go Gamecocks. Yay! Well, you know, flexibility is the name of the game when you're cooking. And when I wrote this recipe, I realize now that I started my onions in a stock pot, not in a saute pan. So since they're here all nice and curried up, I'm going to put them into my stock pot where my butternut squash is still trying to soften. So we'll get these right in here to flavor up this rest of this vegetable stock. And it should be great. Here we go. And you know what? They're getting close to being soft enough. This is one of those other times when you have to be patient. Patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to cooking. It'll just be a few minutes till we have this whole thing in the food processor and we'll be ready to taste it. Okay, so believe it or not, our patience has paid off. And now you can see that everything is in the pot. Everything that needed to be in the pot is in the pot. And but believe it or not, the butternut squash is soft enough to puree. So what I want to do here is I want to try to get the solids out of this pan and into my food processor. So I'm going to put the solids in here. And sometimes, depending on the size of your food processor, you might have to do this in 2 sessions, okay? But we're going to see, this is a pretty generous size one, so I'm going to see how much I can do in this one. I am going to, I've got probably a little bit more than half the solids in here. And I'm going to begin this, and I'm just going to puree this down so I can fit more in, okay? And this food processor was made so that you can do hot things in it, but it has a hole at the top that lets off the steam. So if you don't have one like this at home, you might have to let this cool a little bit before you go ahead and puree. We're going to stand back. Maybe I'll hold my towel up here just in case it shoots out. So far, so good. You can get a facial. Put your face over this little space and have a nice steam facial. Oh my gosh, does it smell good though? It smells so good. And it's pureeing up really nicely. Okay. That's great for that much. Now, I'm gonna see if I can get this off of here. Okay. Ooh, looking good. And I'm gonna add the rest of the solids. You can really smell the curry now, and it seems spicy, but when I add the apple juice into it, that's really going to mitigate that spice a little bit, so it's going to be nice. Okay. And I guess I do have to confess to those of you making this that this food processor is gray inside, but mine, my little spinner in the middle, the little chopper in the middle, is white. And from making this soup over the years, it's become yellow in my food processor because the curry has kind of stained it, actually. Okay. Now, we are going to eat this right away, but if I was making this ahead of time, I would save the rest of the liquid that's in here. and I would just put it in a jar and I would puree this and save it. And then when I went to reheat this puree, I would add in the leftover liquid. But since we're going to eat this right now, I'm just going to put in all this liquid right in here. Okay? So we'll do that next. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to carefully do this again so I can puree the second part of it. That's done. What we're going for here is just we don't want to have any big chunks floating around in the soup if we can avoid it. I'm like a kid with a new toy, but I also don't exactly, this isn't exactly my own food processor, so it's a little, got it. Okay, beautiful. Now I'm going to just pour this back into my stock pot. And I'm going to add in my apple juice. And if it wasn't really burning hot, I would reheat it at this point. But since it already is burning hot, it's really ready. What you'll find with any kind of pureed vegetable soup, especially a soup that's made from a squash or a starchy vegetable, is that as it begins to cool, it will thicken. And yet when you heat it up, it will thin back out again. But that's why you want to save that extra liquid if you're going to be reheating this on another day, because you might want to add a little more liquid to it. So now I'm just going to run and grab a bowl so we can plate this up and you can see how beautiful it looks, and we can take a taste and see what we think. So here we have the finished product of the curried butternut squash soup, and I'm just going to taste it because, as I told you, we should taste everything before we put it out. So we want to make sure it has the right seasoning, salt, or pepper. So we shall see. And it is hot. Delicious. I don't think I even added salt to it. It's so good. Doesn't really need it. So anyway, I hope you enjoy that, and we'll carry on.